She had been so sure he would move on. She had... 3 years. 3 years since Alara had pressed wolfsbane into her own veins until her heartbeat slowed to nothing, until the healers pronounced her gone, until the women of the court draped white linen over a body that was already empty of her spirit, because she had slipped out through the servants' corridor while the death wail still echoed through the stone halls of Valdros. 3 years since she had run. And every single morning since, Kael Valdros, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the wolf whose name alone made lesser alphas bare their throats, had walked to the memorial stone on the eastern ridge overlooking the river, pressed his palm flat against the carved letters of her name, and stood there until the sun finished rising. Every single morning. She knew this because Maren told her. Because the old healer who had helped her disappear still sent letters, encoded, careful, slipped beneath the door of the thatched cottage where Alara now lived under a false name, in a village so far south the wolves there had never heard of Valdros. He does not eat in the Great Hall anymore, Maren told me 6 months ago. He takes his meals alone. The court says he is turning to stone. They're not entirely wrong. Alara had burned the letter. She had burned everything, but she had not stopped reading them first. She told herself she had left because she had no choice, because the curse that lived inside Kael, the ancient frost laid upon his bloodline by a dying witch 3 centuries before his birth, had begun to spread. Not inward, outward, toward her. The closer the meat god pulled them together, the more the cold consumed everything touched. His skin turned to ice beneath his fingers. Frost crept across the bedchamber walls when he slept. In the morning she woke to find her own breath crystallizing in her lungs, her heartbeat slowing without her permission. She understood. The curse did not want her to work. It wanted to live. And it had chosen her as its next move. So she did the only thing she could think of. She died. Carefully, precisely, with wolfsbane measured to the drop. Enough to stop her heart for 11 minutes, while Maren smuggled her true body out of the eastern passage. Enough to make the court enough to make She had thought, she had been certain, that an Alpha King who believed his mate was dead would grieve, rage, perhaps destroy something beautiful, and then, eventually, inevitably, move on. Take a new Luna, continue ruling, survive. She had not accounted for the memorial. She had not accounted for every single moon. The village of Thornwall sat at the edge of a wide valley where the southern packs held no territory. Alara worked in the apothecary, grinding herbs, mixing tinctures, tending to farmers with fevers and children with coughs. She kept her hair shorter than she once had. She wore rough-spun wool instead of the silver-threaded gowns that had felt like armor in Valdros. She did not shift. She had not shifted in 3 years, had pressed her wolf down so deep it felt like holding her breath at the bottom of a frozen lake. It was safer this way. A shifting wolf could be sensed. A shifting wolf could be tracked. A shifting wolf could be found. She was measuring dried rosemary into clay jars on a grey autumn morning when the bell above the apothecary door rang, and a woman she did not recognize stepped inside. Travel-worn, sharp-eyed, the kind of lean that came from weeks on foot. "I'm looking for a healer," the woman said. "Not for me. For a man in my company who has not slept in some time." "How long?" Alara asked, not looking up. 3 years. Her hands went still. "He is camped at the ridge north of the valley," the woman continued. "He will not enter the village. He says he is looking for something. He will not tell me what." He paused. "My name is Seren. I serve as his beater." The jar slipped from Alara's fingers. It did not shatter. Clay against wood, a dull thud, but the rosemary scattered across the counter like fallen Seren had been promoted after Ilara's death, because the previous beater, Lord Halvard, had been discovered 2 months later attempting to sell information about Valdros's weakened defences to the rival Ashenwar pack. Kale had executed him in the training yard. According to Maren's letter, he had done it without shifting, without raising his voice, without expression of any kind. "I think you have the wrong village," Ilara said. Seren studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps, but the wolf who leads me has not been wrong about a scent trail of 3 centuries of woodland." The air left the room. "Who knows?" Ilara whispered. "He is known for level ways. He called the principal bloodline to trading post 40 minutes north. Seren's expression was unreadable. "He sent me ahead because he was afraid that if you saw him first, you would run again. And he was not certain he could survive you dying at once." Ilara pressed her palms flat against the counter. The wood grain bit into her skin. She focused on that, the texture, the solidity, anything that was not the sound of her own heartbeat crashing against her ribs. "You need to understand something," she said, and her voice trembled because she had spent 3 years perfecting the art of steadiness. "I didn't leave it because I wanted to. The curse, it was killing me. It was using the bond to drain me. If I had stayed another month, I would have died, truly died, and it would have consumed him entirely." Seren said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, he said you would say. "He said you would have a reason that sounded like sacrifice and felt like abandonment." She reached into the leather satchel at her hip and withdrew a folded piece of parchment sealed with black wax. Ilara did not reach for it. "He also asked me to tell you that the memorial stone weighs 400 pounds. He carved it himself. And that if you will not read the letter, you should at least come and see what 3 years of grief looks like when it has nowhere to go." She left the parchment on the counter and walked out. The letter sat there for 6 hours. Ilara served 3 customers. She swept the floor. She reorganized the tincture shelf by ailment instead of ingredient, then changed it back. She boiled the water for tea and forgot to drink it. At dusk, she opened the letter. His handwriting had changed. It had always been sharp, precise, angular, the penmanship of a king who signed treaties and death warrants with equal steadiness. But now the letter shook. Not dramatically, just enough. Just enough to see the hand that made them was no longer entirely sure of itself. "I have visited the stone 1,096 times. I know because I count. Counting is all I have left that feels like holding on. The curse has not improved. It has not worsened. It simply remains, as it always has, a cold thing living where warmth should be. But you should know, and I need you to know, because I have had 3 years to understand this, and I will not waste the words. The frost did not begin spreading to you because the bond was a curse. It began spreading because someone was helping you. Halvard. Every night for the last 2 months before you vanished, he laced your evening compound, thinned the barrier between your life force and the cursed reach. He wanted you dead. He wanted the bond severed. He wanted an alpha too broken to notice a betrayal. He nearly succeeded. I found the vials after I killed him. I found the compound. I found letters of his quarters to Ashenwar, promising them a kingdomless king in exchange for territory. You did not have to die, Ilara. You did not have to leave. The curse was not spreading on its own. It was being driven into you like a blade. I am at the northern ridge. I will be there at dawn. I will be there every dawn until you come, or until you tell me to leave. And I will believe whichever answer you give me. But I will not pretend you are dead again. I have spent 1,096 mornings talking to a stone. I would very much like to talk to you last night. She read it 4 times. The third time, something broke in her chest that she had spent 3 years building. A wall. Dead. A frozen thing she had constructed out of necessity and distance, and the absolute conviction that leaving it was the only way to save them both. Alvar. Fatigue. The compound. She had not been dying because of the bomb. She had been murdered. Slowly, carefully, by a man who sat at the king's table and called him brother. The sound that came out of her was not a cry and not a scream. It was something older than either. A wolf's grief, raw and tearing. The sound of an animal that chewed off its own leg to escape a trap that had never been real. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her cot in the dark cottage with the letter in her lap, and she felt 3 years of exile rearrange themselves in her mind. Every cold night she had endured alone. Every morning she had woken reaching for a body that was not there. Every time she had pressed her wolf down, suffocating, because being found meant being dead. All of it unnecessary. All of it built on a dead man's poison. Dawn came grey and cold. Autumn mist sat heavy over the valley, turning the northern ridge into a smudge of dark stone against a pale sky. Ilara pulled on her cloak, the rough-spun one, the one that smelled like dried herbs and wood smoke, and nothing at all like the fur-lined mantle she had once worn, and she walked on. The ridge was a 20-minute climb from the village. She had walked it once before, months ago, drawn by the kind of restless ache that comes at the turn of seasons. She had not known then that she was walking toward anything. She knew now. She saw him before he saw her. He was standing at the edge of the ridge where the ground fell away toward the river, and even from 50 paces, even after 3 years, she knew the shape of him the way she knew her own breathing. The breadth of his shoulders beneath the dark cloak, the way he stood with his weight slightly forward, as if the wind was something he leaned into rather than braced against. He was thinner. That was the first thing she noticed. The second was the frost. It clung to his cloak, his hair, the stone beneath his boots. Not the frost of morning air, but the frost of the curse, the perpetual winter that had lived inside his bloodline for 300 years, visible now in ways it had not been when she left. His breath crystallized. The grass around his feet was white and brittle. He was worse. The curse was worse. And he was still here. He turned before she reached him. She did not know if he heard her footsteps or caught her scent, or if the bond, that involuntary, devastating thread between them, simply told him she was close and easy. His eyes found her across the mist-heavy ridge, and she watched his entire body go still. Not the stillness of a predator, but the stillness of a man who has just been told that the thing he lost is standing 30 paces away, and he is not yet certain he can trust his own senses. Ilara. Just her name, just the 2 syllables of it, spoken in a voice that had once commanded armies, now cracked in the second syllable like ice in the southern air. She stopped walking, not because she wanted to, because her legs stopped working. Behind him, the memorial stone rose from the ridge like a dark tooth against the pale sky. 400 pounds of black granite, carved by hand, her name chiseled deep enough to outlast centuries. The letters were worn smooth at the top, in his palm, she realized. 1,000 mornings of pressing his hand against the stone, and holding it there on the side of the rose. The surface was polished where he had touched it. Only Becky touched it. The rest of the stone was still dark. You are real, he said. Not a question. Not quite. Something in between. A man testing the air before he trusted it to hold him. I am real, she said. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, she saw it. A tremor ran through him, starting in his hands and moving upward. The kind of shaking that has nothing to do with cold, and everything to do with the devastating absence of control. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the wolf who had not shown violence to a living soul in 300 years, stood on the ridge in the mist and shook because she had said true words. I read the letter, she said. Halvar, the compound, Ati. Yes. You killed him. Not quickly enough. Something flickered across his face. Rage, old and fagged. The kind that does not burn hot but sits like coals in the belly of a furnace, always glowing, never quite going out. I thought the curse was taking me, she whispered. I thought if I stayed, we would both die. I thought, pale. I thought I was saving you. I know. He opened his eyes. They were the colour of winter storms, grey and pale, fractured with something luminous beneath, and they were wet. Not tears, not yet. Close. Dangerously close. I know what you thought. I have had 1,096 mornings to understand why you did it, and I have spent every single one of them wishing you had trusted me enough to tell me you were dying, instead of trusting the poison you did not know was there. The words landed like a blade between her ribs, not because they were cruel, because they were true. I did not want you to watch me die, she said. So instead, I watched a coffin. I pressed my hand to a stone every morning and told it things I should have told you. I told it about the council meetings and the border disputes and the way the frost gets worse in winter now because there is nothing in this miserable, frozen existence that generates warmth. His voice dropped. I told a story I loved every morning, because I never told anyone who was standing in front of me, and that is the thing I couldn't do myself. She crossed the remaining distance between them, not running, deliberately, each step a choice, because she had spent 3 years running, and she was finished. If you are enjoying this story, take a moment and hit that like button. It tells me you want more stories like this one. She stopped an arm's length from him. The frost was tangible here. She could feel it radiating off his skin like heat in her voice, a cold that bit at her cheeks and turned her breath to white vapor. Up close, she could see the fine lines of ice that traced his jaw, his throat, the edges of his collarbone where the curse had written itself into his skin like a living tattoo. The frost is worse, she said. The frost has been worse since the morning I found your coffin and realized I had been cursed. A pause. Something shifted behind his eyes. Hope is expensive when you have paid for it in centuries. She raised her hand, slowly, giving him time to step back, to flinch, to do any of the things that 3 years of loss and betrayal had taught him. He did none of them. He stood absolutely still and watched her hand rise toward his face with the expression of a man watching a flame approach dry kindling, knowing what comes next, unable, unwilling to move. Her fingers touched his jaw. The frost cracked. Not metaphorically, not gently. It cracked. An audible sound, like ice splitting in a frozen river, and where her fingertips met the skin, warmth. Actual warmth. Colour spreading outward from the point of contact, the grey of his complexion giving way to something living, something flush, something human. His breath hitched, a sharp, broken sound, the gasp of a man who has been holding his breath for 3 years and has just remembered what air tastes like. That, he said, and his voice was warm. Scraped down to something that was not a king's voice at all, but simply a man's. It is the first warm thing I have felt since you left. Her other hand came up. Arms against his face now. Her thumbs tracing the lines where the frost retreated, mapping the geography of his jaw, his cheekbones, Everywhere she touched, warmth followed. Everywhere she touched, the ice withdrew. The curse was not meant to be killed, she said softly. And it was never meant to be starved. It was meant to be broken. By this. By exactly this. By you. By choosing to come back. By choosing to stay. His hands rose, slowly, as if he had forgotten the mechanics of reaching for someone, as if his body needed to relearn motion, and settled on her waist. The weight of his palms through the rough-spun wool was the most grounding sensation she had ever felt. An anchor, a declaration. The man holding something he had been told was lost, not tightly, not desperately, but with the specific, deliberate care of someone who understood exactly what it would cost. If you leave again, he said, I will follow you. I will not build another stone. I will not breathe another ghost. I will follow you to the edge of every territory you want, and I will be very loyal. The sound she made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. It is not a very kingly threat. I am not making it as a king. His forehead dropped to hers. His skin was warm where it touched hers. Warm for the first time in years. Warm and getting warmer. And the frost on his cloak was melting, dripping, turning the dark fabric darker. I am making it as the fool who carved a 400-pound stone and talked to it every morning because it was the closest thing I had to you. She kissed him, not gently, not tentatively. She kissed him the way water breaks through a dam, sudden, total. The release of 3 years of pressure that had been building behind every burned letter, every sleepless night, every morning she had woken reaching for warmth that was not there. His arms locked around him, pulling her against his chest, and the cold shattered. The curse broke. It was visible, a wave of frost lifting from his body, rising in the mist of the steam, crystallizing in the air for one impossible moment before dissolving into nothing. The ice on the ridge melted. The grass beneath their feet turned green, not gradually, not in patches, but all at once, as if the earth itself had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. His knees buckled, not from weakness, from the sudden, overwhelming flood of sensation, warmth, feel it. The full, unfiltered weight of every emotion the curse had been dampening for 3 centuries, hitting him at once. She caught him, her arms around him, holding him up, and he buried his face in her neck and made a sound that she had never heard from him before, and hoped she would never hear again. The raw, gutted sound of a man feeling everything for the first time in 300 years, and finding that the first thing he felt was her. Stay, he said with her head. Stay. I am asking, not commanding, not as your alpha, just stay. I am staying, she said. I am done running from things that are not actually trying to kill me. He pulled back enough to look at her. His eyes were clear, not grey-white anymore, not storm-coloured, but a deep, warm amber, the colour they must have been before the curse, the colour no living wolf had ever seen. Tears tracked down his face, and he did not wipe them away, and she understood that this was its own kind of defiance, the most powerful wolf alive, standing on a ridge in full view of the valley below, crying without shame, because the woman he loved was alive, warm, holding his face in her hands. Come home, he said. But coming home was not simple. Seren was waiting at the base of the ridge with 3 mounted wolves from the royal guard. She took one look at the Alpha King, frostless, amber-eyed, visibly shaking, and said nothing. She simply handed Alara a cloak lined with wolf fur and gestured toward the horses. The court does not know, Seren said as they rode home. then the court will have opinions. Lady Morwenna in particular will have many opinions. She will voice them loudly. Seren's jaw tightened. She has been positioning herself as the most suitable lunar candidate for 2 years. She controls the Elder Council through her father, Lord Fenwick. She will not welcome your return. Cale, riding beside him, said nothing, but his hand moved to the pommel of his sword. An unconscious gesture, a wolf preparing for a fight that has not yet been challenged to. They arrived at Valdros 3 days later, at dusk, when torches were being lit along the fortress walls, and the great hall was full. Seren had timed it deliberately. Maximum witnesses, minimum time for conspiracies to organize. The doors opened. Ilara walked through them with her chin level and her hands steady, exactly as she had walked through them 3 years ago, when she arrived as a nameless Omega, bonded to a king. The hall went silent, not gradually, instantly. The sound of 200 wolves holding their breath at once. Lady Morwenna was the first to speak. She stood from her seat at the high table, tall, silver-haired, draped in white fox fur, every inch of her designed to project authority, and her voice carried across the hall like the crack of winter thunder. This woman is dead, pronounced dead by the court healers, mourned by the king, buried in the traditions of this pack. Whatever creature walks through that door wearing her face is not the Luna of Valdros. The hall shifted, wolves exchanging glances, the Elder Council leaning forward. The energy in the room balanced on a knife's edge. One push in either direction, and it would tip toward chaos or compliance. Ilara stopped in the center of the room. She could feel Cale behind her, the heat of him, the steady presence, the bond humming like a wire pulled taut. She could feel him preparing to step forward, to use his authority, to end this with a command. She spoke first. "I am not dead," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had spent 3 years learning how to speak without shaking, and she would spend every remaining day grateful for the skill. "I was poisoned by Lord Halvard, slowly, deliberately, through my evil teeth, with a compound designed to thin the barrier between my life force and his prince. He intended to kill me, and use the king's grief to seize control of this pack's defenses. He nearly succeeded. I did the only thing I knew to do. I disappeared before the poison finished its work." Murmurs, shifting. The hall was listening. "Halvard is dead," she continued. "The king executed him when the conspiracy was discovered. The evidence, the vials, the letters to Ashenmore, the compound, is in the records of this court. I invite any elder who doubts my words to review them." Lady Morwenna's expression had not changed. Cold, precise, calculating. A convenient story, told by a woman who deceived her king and abandoned her pack. Whatever Halvard's crimes, your flight was its own betrayal. "Yes," Ilara said. "It was." The hall went still again. They had not expected agreement. "I made a choice born of fear and incomplete knowledge. I believed the curse was consuming me through the bond. I was wrong. But I will not stand before this court and pretend I acted in cowardice. I acted to save the life of your king. Poorly, imperfectly, at a cost I am still counting. And I am here now, not to reclaim a title, but to earn it again." She turned to Cale. He was standing 3 paces behind her, and the look on his face, she had never seen it before. Not in 3 years of marriage, not in the desperate, raw hours on the ridge. It was pride, unguarded, devastating, complete. "She is my mate," Cale said, not loudly. He did not need volume. He was the Alpha King, and when he spoke, the walls listened. "The bond is unbroken. The curse is shattered. And the next wolf who questions her right to stand in this hall will answer to me personally." not as a matter of politics, as a matter of what I am willing to tolerate, which, after 3 years of grieving a woman who was alive the entire time, is very little. He looked at Morwenna. The amber of his eyes flamed, warm, but with something behind the warmth that reminded every person in the room that warmth and gentleness were not the same thing. "Sit down, Lady Morwenna." She sat. The coronation happened 1 week later. Seren organized it with the same meticulous efficiency she brought to military campaigns, and when Elara walked through the great hall in a gown of deep midnight blue, not white, not silver, not the traditional lunar colors, because she was not a traditional lunar, and she saw no reason to pretend, the pack knelt. Not all of them willingly, but all of them. 3 months later, the court of Valdros was unrecognizable. The frost that had coated the fortress walls for centuries was gone. In its place, ivy climbed the stone, green and thick, and in the great hall, someone had opened the windows. All of them. Every iron-shuttered, ice-sealed window. The autumn air moved through the room, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the distant, clean smell of the river. Elara stood at the window of the king's chamber, her chamber now, theirs, and watched the sun come up over the ridge where the memorial stone still stood. Chaol had not moved. When she had asked why, he had said, "Because I do not want to forget what it cost. Either of us." The court had adjusted, not easily. There had been whispers, an Omega who faked her own death, who deceived the king, who fled. And Seren had handled the whispers with the kind of precise, methodical authority that made Elara deeply grateful to have the Beta as an ally rather than an adversary. The wolves who could not accept it fled. The wolves who stayed found themselves living in a kingdom that was, for the first time in 3 centuries, warm. A letter had arrived the previous week from Elara's sister, Vela, who had refused to speak her name after she was bonded to an alpha who had called her a disgrace for being chosen above her station. The letter was 3 pages of careful, trembling apology. It mentioned the coronation. It mentioned the gardens that were said to be blooming in the fortress courtyard for the first time in living memory. It closed with a request to visit. Elara had written back, "You may come, but you will bow when you enter the great hall, as everyone does, and you will call me by my title." She had signed it, Elara Valdros, Luna of the Northern Territories. The door opened behind her. Chaol stepped in, warm, sleep-rumpled, amber-eyed, carrying 2 cups of tea that he had clearly made himself because the kitchen staff had learned that the Alpha King preferred to bring his maid her morning tea personally and had stopped attempting to intervene. "The ridge," he said, handing her a cup. "Dawn. You still go?" "No." He stood beside her at the window, looking out at the stone on the ridge, small and dark against the brightening sky. "But now I go to remember, not to grieve." She leaned into him. His arm came around her shoulders, warm and heavy and certain. The bond hummed between them, steady now, unbroken, a current of warmth that moved through both of them like a second heartbeat. "Chaol?" "Yes." "You talked to a stone for 3 years. What did you tell him?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, with the ghost of something that might have been a smile, "Everything I am going to spend the rest of my life telling you instead." The sun broke over the ridge. The frost was gone. The gardens were blooming. And the Alpha King of the Northern Territories drank his tea by the window with his Luna beside him, warm for the first time in 300 years, and did not visit the stone that morning. He did not need to. She was already here. Now, I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, tell me your favorite moment. I read every single one. If you are not subscribed yet, come join us. Stories like this one are just the beginning. I will see you in the next one.